Hello learners, in the previous session you have learned about international tourism. Like we have discussed also, when travel for tourism, it involves crossing a national border, then we call it as international tourism. Today the focus of this particular session is on domestic tourism. Now, when we talk about tourism, domestic tourism, it is that type of tourism where the tourist is traveling within his or her country of residence. All the tourism activities are being done within the boundary of his or her own country of residence. So after this session, you will be able to define what is domestic tourism. In fact, we have already defined it. We will just go into more characteristics of domestic tourism. Then you should be able to differentiate between the different forms of domestic tourism and then explain the reason behind the growth of domestic tourism and understand the significance of domestic tourism in the overall Indian tourism scenario. Like I have said also, domestic tourism, it involves residents of a country traveling within the boundaries of their own country. The World Tourism Organization, it describes a domestic tourist as any person traveling to a place within the borders of his or her country and which is other than his or her own usual environment for a period of less than 1 year, but for at least one night, and whose main purpose of visit is other than the exercise of an activity remunerated from within the place visited. So if you look at this definition, we can sum up some of the salient characteristics of domestic tourism. Like other forms of tourism also, domestic tourism, it does not involve travel for remunerative purpose. You cannot, if you say within India, if you're going from one state to another for a leisure, pleasure purpose, then you are a domestic tourist. But if you are relocating to another state for employment purpose, you are not a domestic tourist. You are not counted as a domestic tourist. Domestic tourism, it is one of the oldest known form of tourism. And here, the travelers, they do not require to cross the international borders of the country. And therefore, we do not require any documents like the passport or the visa to travel. Then domestic tourism, it relies more on surface transport networks such as road and railway networks. Air travel is also done, but basically if you look at a country like India with a huge population, then most of the people will travel by railways. So in domestic tourism, elsewhere in other countries also, rail and road networks, they are preferably or more preferred over and above the air network. Because even in European countries, they have the road network is more prominent, whereas in Indian context, the rail network is more prominent in tourism, in domestic tourism. Then domestic tourism, it encompasses travel from across income groups, whereas in the case of international tourism, we have come to know that it is usually limited to higher income groups. When you are traveling outside the country, then obviously you need more money to spend or more money to accommodate all the requirements. But when you are traveling within your own country, then obviously lots of travel documentations are not required, so the amount of money that is required for the tourism purpose in domestic tourism, it is quite low compared to the international tourism. So in domestic tourism, people from across the income groups participates in it. Then demand for domestic tourism, it is determined by factors within a country and therefore can be easily forecasted. Then the demand for tourism, domestic tourism, can be easily regulated. So this is also because it can be easily forecasted, it can be easily regulated as compared to international tourism. In international tourism, the bilateral relationship between two countries also matters. But when you are governed by the same government, then obviously you have a common form. So what laws applies in your state before you come out, and when you go to another states it is the same. Whereas in international tourism it is different policies, different laws, different regulations are there. So international tourism is hard to regulate. If certain parts of if a certain country is going through a bad phase, or there is a terrorist attack in certain other countries, then it will be difficult, or the regulation changes entirely. But if it happens within the country, the part where the terrorist attack is going on, it may be affected, but other parts can go on as it is. So international tourism and the domestic tourism, there are quite a certain points of difference between those two. Domestic tourism, it is one of the most important sector of a country's tourism and hospitality industry in India. But in India, till a few years back, it was the most neglected one, often being relegated to the bottom rung in the priority list. But then of late, realization has dawned upon both the industry and the government that it is the domestic tourism which sustains the overall tourism industry in the country. And in contrast to inbound or outbound tourism operation, the huge volume of traffic that domestic tourism generates usually compensates its low profit margin of operation. Why the operators and all, they were aiming for international tourism or the inbound international tourism, was because of the foreign exchange or the revenue which comes in terms of US dollars, whereas in domestic tourism they feel the revenue generated is very low. But like I said, if the volume of travel which is happening is so huge in domestic tourism, it compensates for the low profit of operation. Now, hundreds of years of travel history in India have contributed to shaping the modern day domestic tourism that we see. People have traveled from time immemorial for trade, pilgrimage, learning, and other social purposes. The archaeological evidences also suggest that travel for purpose of trade existed way back in the Indus Valley civilization. Now, historical evidences suggest the presence of a wide network of facilities for traveling traders and pilgrims, such as dharamshalas are there, the sharayas and other wayside amenities. Then major trade routes were well connected by a network of roads, and amenities were built for travelers by the local rulers and kings. Then again, during the Mughal rule in India, the travel for pleasure received a further impetus. The grand palaces and the beautiful gardens built by the Mughals are still important and prominent tourist attraction sites in India. Then the British era in India can perhaps be credited to the widespread of domestic travel in India, because this period it showed an extensive expansion of transport infrastructure in India, along with travel facilities like bungalows, then circuit houses. Because the British, they traveled from Kula mountains and hills in order to escape. They traveled to Kula mountains and hills in order to escape the hot summers of India. So this set a precedence, a trend for many places located at higher altitudes to function and to be developed into a hill station or resort. Then post-independence also, the Indian government, it continues to take numerous measures to promote the domestic tourism in India. Let us now look at some of the statistical figures regarding domestic tourism in India. Well, if you see international tourist arrivals, there have been frequently collected, the data on this has been frequently collected on a regular basis. But data on domestic tourism are generally very rarely connected. So realizing the huge potential of domestic tourism development in the country, the Department of Tourism, Government of India had for the first time conducted a pilot survey of domestic tourism at 22 centers spread all over the country in 1981-82. And some of the major findings of this pilot survey were: Age is an important factor, with 30 to 35 years being the largest group, followed by 13 to 21 years. Then majority of the domestic tourists that travel with family. Then people from business, service and professional form the bulk of the tourist market. Majority of tourists, they come from the middle class and the upper middle class. Domestic tourists, they do not go for long holidays as compared to foreign tourists, whose average length of stay in India is about 28.4 days. Now, and rail travel remains the dominant mode of travel. Why this pilot survey was very important was because it was for the first time that certain information regarding the domestic tourism in India was brought into the picture. Now, and this survey, it also showed the changing taste and the trends in the domestic sector. For example, adventure and ecotourism is picking up. We are talking about 1981-82. It was low, way long back. And weekend travel to nearby destination is increasing. Besides the lift travel concession, which the government employees and the private sector employees besides the lift travel concession which the government employee avail, the private sector employees were also getting travel incentives, and the number of honeymooners is increasing, expenditure on shopping is increasing, convention tourism is peaking. So from this we can have the tour operators or the service providers, they have a rough idea of how the domestic tourism sector in India was performing. So this obviously helps them in making the marketing plans and the marketing strategy also. And after this pilot study, it took nearly a decade for the Indian government to take steps for conducting the next major survey regarding the domestic tourism sector in the country. The National Council of Applied Economic Research was commissioned to conduct the nationwide domestic tourism survey in 2002 and 2003. Then again, if you look at the constitution of the Association of Domestic Tour Operators in 1996, with the purpose of consolidating the efforts of all the tour operators who are actively engaged in the promotion of domestic tourism. So this has helped to address some of the important missing issues in the tourism industry sector, or the lack of attention and interest which the domestic tourism industry sector was witnessing. Now, one of the most recent study was conducted between the years 2014 and 15 by the National Sample Survey Office, which is under the Ministry of Statistics and Programming Implementation to the Government of India. Now, if you look at the growth of domestic tourism in India, it is an ongoing and a very progressive pace. It is growing at a very progressive pace, because India is a land of abundance in terms of tourism resources and attraction. And this wealth of natural and cultural heritage of India, it has made it a natural choice for tourism development. So what happens is, the inbound tourism no doubt are coming in, but the domestic tourists, when we have a huge population, for the people of the country with a huge population of India, when they have to go for tourism purposes, and they do not have that much of income or that much of money to spend, then visiting or going for an outbound trip is out of bounds for them. So what we can resort is, we can resort to the domestic tourism, or your travel within your own country. So domestic tourist arrivals side by side along with the arrivals of the foreign tourists have also been increasing in India, and the growth has been phenomenal. If you look at even at the 2019 figures, the number of domestic tourists movement in India is much more than the total international tourist movement all over the world. So this is the kind of scenario that we are having, and it is very important that the development of domestic tourism, it also is given its due importance, side by side along with the focus on the international tourism development, which the Ministry of Tourism is focusing on. So for the tourism industry in India, domestic tourism, it sustained the tourism operators and service providers during the lean period when the number of international tourist arrival dips. So in domestic tourism, in this case, it acts as a good demand substitute. Now, we have already talked about seasonality in international tourism. So domestic tourism, it is like a cushion. When the number of tourist arrivals, international tourist arrival decreases during the lean period, the number of domestic tourist movement, it compensates for them. And this makes domestic tourism a much more reliable source of tourist inflow for the tourism service providers. And domestic tourism, it is therefore recognized as a vehicle for regional development, where individual states and union territories of India too have prioritized the development of this sector to attract more tourists from other states. The top 10 Indian states with the highest domestic tourist visits for the year 2019 are given here. The states of Uttar Pradesh and Tamil Nadu combined together, they receive over 43% of the total domestic tourists in the country. Historical monuments along with religious places of interest can be credited to such a high amount of tourists. Now, this 10 states, top 10 states which we have listed, they account for almost 87% of the total domestic movement in the country. So you can see this 10 states is how important they are in terms of the domestic tourism scenario in the country. But one point of caution is that the development of domestic tourism, while it has been steady, it has been sporadic and limited to just a few states, like this 10 states that we have listed above. Then this uneven spread of tourism growth also highlights a gap in terms of benefits that tourism development can lend to the regional economy. Now let us look at some of the reasons why the growth of domestic tourism in India was taking place. One is the steady economic growth. India in the last decade, it witnessed a steady economic growth thanks to the development across sectors. So it is not only across the manufacturing factor, it is the development across the agricultural factor, the agricultural sector, the IT sector. So development across sectors have been taking place, and this has resulted in an upward trend in the country's gross domestic product, or the GDP. And the increasing disposable income. So this increasing disposable income among Indians is considered to be one of the most important reasons behind the growth of domestic tourism in India. And if you go by a 2019 report by the World Economic Forum, India is poised to become the third largest consumer market behind only the United States of America and China. So the consumer spending in India is expected to grow nearly $6 trillion by 2030. So this is as per the report which is given by the World Economic Forum. So domestic tourism is one of the main beneficiary of the growth in disposable income. Then we have discussed before also, I have mentioned it, India's growing middle class. So this steady economic development in India, it has resulted in employment generation in the country. And this has moved a large number of people into the middle income and the upper middle income group. And this group, that is the middle class and the upper middle class, they aspire for a better and a finer lifestyle and form one of the largest segment of domestic tourism in the country. Because when everything, your basic necessity is fulfilled, then travel is one of the most prominent reason that people want to spend their money. So and that is where the domestic tourism expands. Then the changing lifestyle. With the increasing disposable income among the people, the propensity to travel for pleasure has also witnessed a rise, this we have already said. And not just the mainstream tourism destination, even the smaller and upcoming tourism destinations are benefiting due to this trend. Experiences to such tourist segment. Then again, the improved tourism infrastructure is also another reason why we have witnessed a growth in the domestic tourism scene. India's transport infrastructure in the recent years have seen rapid development, whether it is India's air transport network connecting even the Tier 3 cities, or the construction of express highways that have considerably reduced the travel time. Tourism has been one of the natural beneficiaries to expansion of transport networks in India. Then again, you have seen the rise in the number of ownership of cars among the middle and the upper middle income groups, and this has encouraged the self-drive vacation in India. For example, we have witnessed a number of working people, they take a short break, weekend breaks. So they do not prefer going by booking themselves into a formal network like an airlines or railways. What they take is they take their own cars and then they drive to a destination which is about say 300 to 400 kilometers, which they can easily accessible by their own cars. And this gives them the freedom to enjoy or to plan their itinerary or to plan their tour according to their own at their own pace and the type of experience that they want to as they go about. So this trend of self-drive vacation in India is possible because of the improved road network in India. So the initiative by the Ministry of Tourism and the State Tourism Board is also one of the factors for domestic tourism to come up at such a rapid pace. We have a very active Ministry of Tourism working overtime, and both at the state and the central level, various initiatives has been launched to encourage investment in India. And this includes tax holidays, single window clearance for tourism projects, attractive investment schemes, and many other incentives. So this has resulted in a number of multinational hotel brands investing in India. And this initiative, it has made the tourism supply more robust and to meet the continually increasing demand for tourism products in India. While you may think the investment of the multinational hotel brands in India would benefit only the international tourists, but the picture is otherwise. If you look at the other side also, domestic tourists, they would also aspire to stay in branded hotels. So if they go to a certain other states for the tourism purposes, many Indians are checking into high-end hotels. So the number of multinational hotels brands in India benefits not only the international tourism but also the domestic tourism. Then various promotional and advertising campaigns run by the center and the central and the state tourism have also resulted in channelizing demand for tourism services in smaller and in upcoming destinations as well. Then relevant trends in domestic tourism in India. This is again a very important characteristics that we need to know, because if we know the trend, then we would also know how to cater to that trend. When there is a demand, then the supply has to be there. So if you know the demand, then supplying it would be easier. So if we know what the tourist wants, or what exactly are the tourists expecting out of the when they go to another state or another area within their own country, it becomes very easy for the service providers to step up and then fulfill the gap that they see in the business environment. Let us use the data from one of the most recent studies conducted between the years 2014-2015 by the National Sample Survey Office, Ministry of Statistics and Programming Implementation, Government of India. Here we would be able to know what are the purpose of travel, then what all are the trends which a domestic tourism is going through, and it will be really helpful for the service providers to design the product according to it. Holidaying, leisure and recreation is one of the most important purpose of domestic tourism in urban India, and this is because of the increasing disposable income among the young urban middle class. We can credit it to them for this demand in the domestic tourism. Also, the younger working population, they are believed to be more inclined towards frequent holidaying to a nearby destination. They are not going for longer vacation. They are going for shorter breaks. For example, say a weekend break, but at least 5 or 6 times a year instead of a 1 month break in a whole year. So this is, and as per this study, the month of May, June and October, it generates about 40% of overnight trips among the trips completed during the year 2014 and 15, with leading purposes, like we said, it is being the holidaying, leisure and recreation. Health and medical is another reason why people travel in India. Like in most countries in the world, we have healthcare facilities which are unevenly distributed between the urban and the rural areas. So there is a trend where the rural household, they showed more travel on account of health and medical treatment when they visit the urban areas. But if you look at the wellness tourism point of view, we have 2 types. One is the medical tourism, one is the wellness tourism. Medical tourism, more of rural area people coming to the urban area to avail the medical facilities. Well, wellness tourism is more of a relaxing. It has got no medical intervention. So here the urban tourists, they travel to the rural areas. Then social visiting, family and friend is another reason. The culture of India is deeply rooted in the family values. So traditionally festivities and other celebrations, they are considered incomplete without the gathering of family and friends. So this is understandable when we say visiting friends and families is one of the most important reason for domestic travel in India. Religious and pilgrimages travel is in fact the very essence of the cultural fabric in India, and we have numerous religious belief and sects, and people travel to places of religious importance. So pilgrimage is one of the oldest forms of travels in India. Then travel for business is yet another important reason for growth of domestic tourism in India. We have the IT hubs. Hyderabad is there, Delhi is also one of them, Bangalore is there. So travel to these major cities for business purpose is on the rise. Also, the proliferation of international hotel chains can be credited to business tourism. Then we also have a number of international trade shows, conventions and conferences, making cities like Delhi, Mumbai and Bangalore a hub of business-related travel in India. Then education and training is yet another main reason. In the field of higher and technical education, we attract students from across the country. So we have people from one state in fact, most of the state in India coming to Delhi for higher education purpose. So travel for the purpose of education may also include short-haul travel for the purpose of research and other related purposes. For example, going for academic conference, attending 2 or 3 days, or you are going, or a researcher is going to another part of the country for collecting data for PhD or the research work. Then if you look at the mode of travel, Indian Railway is one of the largest rail network in the world, connecting the length and breadth of the country. So through the subsidiary arm of the Indian Railway, which is the Indian Railway Catering and Tourism Corporation, or the IRCTC, they have endeavored to promote domestic tourism in the country. the Bharat Darshan rail tourism packages are there, the Buddhist tourist circuit trains, luxury trains like the Palace on Wheels. These are some of the most successful tourism initiative of the Indian Railways. Then air travel has also been over the years a growing choice of travel among the urban Indians. We have the UDAN scheme, which is a regional airport development and regional connectivity scheme of the government of India. Then road travel, as you know, has always been one of the most convenient and popular mode of transport in India, and the country is endowed with over more than 132,500 kilometers long network of national highways. So when we talk about accommodation, we have varieties of accommodation units, starting from the budget hotels to the high-end hotels. And as per the study, about 91% of the overnight visitor trips from rural areas completed, they stayed with friends and relatives or in other places, whereas in the case of urban travelers, the place of stay during trips were friends and relatives at 36.2%, other places at 33.2%, and hotels and guest house are also there. Then the tourism expenditure among the domestic tourists, this is also important to understand, because the nature and the extent of tourist spending on various tourism components, it allows us to recognize the importance that tourists associate with each of these components. So let us look at some of the advantages just to wrap up the session. We see tourism, domestic tourism has been the cushion when it comes to the seasonality issues in which the international tourism scenario it depicts when it comes to the lean season. And then we have also seen that the domestic tourism is not greatly affected due to disturbance in a global political and economic climate, making it a more reliable source of income for the country, especially at times when international tourists do not travel due to the situation of unrest of such other reasons, then domestic tourism can support the tourism service providers. So in a nutshell, we have talked about the features of domestic tourism. We have also explained the reason behind the growth of domestic tourism in India, and I have also gone through some of the statistics or the figures of domestic tourism and the importance that the Indian government, both at the center and the state level, has been emphasizing on the growth of domestic tourism, apart from focusing only on the international tourism, because domestic tourism is one of the areas, in spite of the low amount of profit it generates, the amazing volume of travel that domestic tourism in India is there, it compensates for so many things. Thank you so much for this session.